adding and subtracting decimals with different amounts of decimal places. When adding and subtracting decimals, it's important to understand the place value of the numbers that you're working with. So here I have a place value grid. It shows from millions all the way down to thousands. Now we know that there are numbers smaller than thousands on the place value grid, and we know that there are numbers bigger than millions on the place value grid. But for year 5, these are all of the values that we need to focus on. So I have here my decimal point. Now my decimal point, it sits in between the ones column and the tenths column. So I have tenths, hundreds, thousands, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands and millions. Now on here on my grid I have two 2-digit numbers. However, only one digit in each number has the same place value. So have a look at my grid, have a look at which 2 digits have the same place value as each other. So it's here, the ones. I have 2 ones. I have the number 11. Now I know it's 11 because I have 1 10 and I have 1 1. And I have 1.1. I have a 1, I have a decimal point, and I have 1/10. Now I'm going to show you a quick example of the importance of lining up your numbers properly, and then we'll move on to some more examples. So the calculation I have, just a nice simple one. Now you of course could do this mentally, but I want to make sure we go through the formal method so it's clear. I'm going to do it nice and big here. 11. Now I'm going to place my 1.1. Now this is where it gets trickier because I haven't got any place value subheadings here on my sheet, but I do know from my place value knowledge that I have a 1 in 11 and I have a 1 in 1.1. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to line up my ones. And I know from my place value knowledge that the decimal point always goes before the ones column, after the ones column rather. So, and I know I have 1/10. I know that I'm adding, and I'm going to put my equal sign here. Now what I'm going to do next, before I add anything, is I'm going to place a 0 anywhere where there is a digit not given. So I don't have a digit here because I don't have any tenths in 11. I must put my decimal point in its correct place. It always sits in between the ones and the tenths. And I'm going to put a 0 here because I don't have any tens. Now before I calculate these two numbers, I'm going to double check that I'm happy that I have all of the digits in the correct column, because I know if I haven't aligned them properly, I won't get the correct answer at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to place the subheadings at the top. So I've got my tenths column, my decimal point, I have my ones, and I have my tens. So I know I have 1 10 and 1 1 in 11. I have 1 1 in 1.1 and I have 1/10 in 1.1. Now that I'm happy that they're in the right order, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add them. So I have 0, add 1 is 1. Now you always start, normally it would be the ones column when we add, but it's the tenths column today because I've got tenths. Put my decimal point here. 1 and 1 is 2, and 1 and 0 is 1. 12.1. Now, like I said earlier on, this was a very, very simple calculation that you could have done mentally. But before we move on to trickier calculations, I just wanted to focus on the skill of aligning some of the digits correctly. Now, if we didn't align these correctly, we could have got the answer 2.2 or we could have got the answer 22. So this is why it's very important that we align the numbers correctly. Okay, so we're going to go through 2 examples of adding numbers with different amounts of decimal places and 2 examples of subtracting numbers with different amounts of decimal places. So the first calculation we're going to look at is 38.29 and we're adding 451.7. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use a formal method for addition. I'm going to use a column. So I'm going to place these 2 numbers in a column. So I have, I'll do it here, 38.29. Now when looking at my second number, I'm going to align the numbers based on the decimal point because I find that easier. So if you look at how many decimal places this number's got, it's got 1. The first number had 2. And before the decimal point, I have 3 digits. I have 1, 5 and a 4, 451.7. Now I'm going to place a 0 where there are digits not given. So there is no digit here, there's no digit here. Now by adding those zeros, I haven't changed the number in any way. I've just made the numbers have the same amount of digits. I'm adding, put my large equal sign, 9 add 0 is 9, 2 and 7 is 9. I have my decimal point there. The decimal point should always align. They should always be in the same place. They should all line up in between the ones and the tenths column. Now I have 8 and 1, which is 9, and I have 3 and 5, which is 8, and I have 0 and 4, which is 4. So my final answer is 489.99. Now moving on to example number 2. I have the numbers 799. Now this number has no decimal places. It has no decimal point and no decimal places. So we must use our knowledge of place value to align these numbers. So I know I have an 8. I know it's an 8 because if I go back to, let me just find my place value grid. If I go back to my place value grid, I know that the column next to the decimal point here is the ones column. And I know I have 8. I know the value is 8 because it is next to the decimal point. So I know if the 9 is a 1, I know that my 8 must align in the ones column. And I'll put my decimal point there, and my 5 and my 4. So when you have numbers like this, it's trickier. It's trickier to align them, so you must use your knowledge of place value. Now I'm going to go ahead again, and I'm going to put zeros everywhere where there are no digits given. And I must put my decimal point there. I'm adding, and I'll put my equal sign. 0 and 4 is 4. 0 and 5 is 5. Put my decimal point there. 9 and 8 is 17. I must carry my 1 across because the largest number I can have in the column is a 9. 9 and 0 is 9. Add 1 is 10. Carry it across again. 7 and 0 is 7. Add the 1 is 8. So my answer is 807.99. 0.54. Now those are my examples for addition. Now moving on to subtraction. I have 394 0.1, and my second number, if I align the decimal point first, I know after the decimal point I have one decimal place, and I know before the decimal point I have two digits. I have 89. So I must make sure I align the 8 in the tens column and the 9 in the ones column. And I will put a 0 here to make sure both numbers have the same amount of digits. I am subtracting this time. For my equal sign. 1 minus 3 we cannot do, so I must steal from the column next door. Taking 1 away from 4 will leave 3 and add 1 in the column, in the tenths column. 11 minus 3, 8. Put my decimal point here. 3 minus 9 I cannot do because 3 is a smaller value than 9, so I must steal from the column next door. The column next door is the tens column. There were 9 tens, I'm going to take 1 away, leaving 8, and I'm going to steal 1. So now there is 13. 13 subtract 9. 4. 8 minus 8 is 0, and 3 minus 0 is 3. So my answer is 304.8. Now my final calculation is 40.2, and I am subtracting 37.62. So align the decimal points first. After the decimal point I have two decimal places, a 6 and a 2. So I have a 6 in the tenths column and a 2 in the hundredths column. And I have 37. Okay, now I'm going to put a 0 here to make sure that the numbers have the same amount of digits. I'm subtracting again. Put my equal sign, starting in the ones, not the ones rather, starting in the hundredths. 0 minus 2 I cannot do, so I'm going to steal. I'm going to steal from the tenths column. 10 minus 2 is 8. 1 minus 6 I cannot do. Steal from the column next door. Now the value of the column next door is 0, so we cannot take anything from there, so we must go to the tens column. Now if we steal a 1 from the tens column, we cannot take it straight across to two columns. We must take it to the column that's next to the column we've stolen from, and then take it from there. So we've taken 1 away from here, we must put it there. Now that there is a value in the column next door, in the ones column, we can steal something from them. So they have 10, we're going to steal 1, leaving them with 9. 11 minus 6 is 5. 9 minus 7 is 2, and 3 minus 3 is 0. Now that we've gone through some examples together, it's your turn to try and calculate some questions where there are different amounts of decimal places. So you have 5 addition and 5 subtraction. You will need a scrap piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, so just jot down the calculations and have a go at adding and subtracting them. Remember to use your decimal point as a guide. If you have a look how many decimal places you have, so the numbers that come after the decimal point, and then pop those down, and then how many digits you have before. If you use the decimal point as a guide, you will find it a lot easier. And then place any missing digit anywhere there's not a digit given, add a 0, and when you have the right amount, the same amount of digits, you'll find it easier to calculate. So if this isn't very clear, I'll zoom in so the numbers are nice and big and easy to read. So pause the video when you're happy that you can see the numbers clearly, and then pause it when you're finished to see whether or not your answers are correct.